like Lindsey has a new man. She shared this guy that she's dating who's a cowboy that managed to lasso her heart, and she showed off this engagement ring that she recently received from him, and she showed this video where she's jumping in his arms, and she said from federal prison to love after lockup to walking across the stage as a college graduate. I said yes. Then she said, you seen my prison mugshot, you watched the craziness on Love After Lockup, you saw me walk across the stage with my degree. Now y'all better see this ring. It's official. I said yes to Chad Booker, to peace, to healing, to a man who actually shows up. Life did a 180 and somehow gave me the softest love after the hardest battles. Then she shared more pictures of herself up close with him. On Monday for Memorial Day, she made a special post for her fiance. She shared a throwback picture of him, and she said, my future husband served with Alpha Company 27 Infantry Battalion. It was one of the first units into Baghdad. He was in Iraq, Afghanistan, and South Korea. He earned the Combat Infantry Badge, but not without permanent injuries. He came home, but like so many others who didn't. And then shout out to Rewatch Reality because she spilled some tea on Chad Booker, Lindsey's man. Apparently, he was arrested for manslaughter and served 5 years in prison. So this is some of the court paperwork, and it says a jury sitting before the Tippah County Circuit Court found Chad Booker guilty of manslaughter. The circuit court sentenced him to 20 years in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections with 10 years suspended and 5 years of post-release supervision. So he had to do 5 years in prison and 5 years of probation. What led Lindsey's man, Chad, to prison was a dispute between neighbors. So it all started in this intersection of country roads in Tippah County, Mississippi, and this dispute culminated in the death of a 61-year-old man by the name of David White. So White and his adult son, Keith White, owned an all-terrain vehicle shop that was located behind White's house. Booker's parents, Buster and Frida Booker, which is Lindsey's man's parents, lived across the street from White. Chad had his own house near his parents' house, and at the time, he was a 23-year-old veteran of the United States Army, and he operated a auto body shop and studied radiology at Blue Mountain College. And all this matches up between the college, the age, his job, with the same information he shares on his Facebook, and he's already confirmed with an interview that he did that all this did happen, and he was arrested and sent to prison for manslaughter. So on Saturday, March 10th of 2007, White and Keith were working at their ATV shop, and Chad drove a 1990s model Ford Mustang by the ATV shop. According to Keith, they claim that Chad drove his Mustang at approximately 70 to 80 miles per hour, but Chad and his passenger Tyler disputed that. They claimed they were only driving probably half of that. They were like, we were only driving like 40, 50 miles per hour. They drove off, and the next thing you know, they came back. And then White ended up coming outside, and he confronted Chad, and he said, look, you're not going to be speeding and driving all crazy out here on my road. And Chad was like, dude, I'm just trying to test drive this car. I'm trying to see if they will shift a certain way. Just chill out. It's not that big of a deal. And then White clapped back and said, no, you're not going to do this on my goddamn road. Chad was pretty much like, whatever, dude. And he got in his Mustang and he drove off. But that was not the end of the dispute. According to Keith, later that night, Chad stopped back at the end of the driveway, of the White's driveway. He put his truck in neutral and revved the engine, just being a little shit starter. And Keith testified that Chad drove past White's house approximately 4 times that night, and on his last pass, he made sure he yelled out the window, F you. So pretty much he was just like terrorizing and harassing him for the rest of the night. White's wife, Charlotte wife, testified that Chad's parents ended up reaching out to her that Sunday afternoon, trying to see if it was probably best if White just apologized to Chad to end the beef. And Chad did admit at one point that, I don't think I need to apologize, but I'll go ahead. I'm gonna apologize. According to court documents, they say it was undisputed that Chad beat White to death the next evening. Philip Possum Nance gave statements to Terry Cox, an investigator employed by Chad's defense attorney, and agent John Hillhouse of the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations. And both statements, Nance said that Chad stopped by his used car dealership on March 12th, and he stated that he was confused on why White had called the police on him. Chad told White, "Look, you can either call the authorities or I can get out of my Mustang and we can settle this like real men." So apparently White decided that he finally wanted to go to Chad's house and ride to Chad's house on his ATV so he could apologize to him face to face. And according to Chad, White came flying over to his house on his ATV, and Chad said that White turned off the Rhino, got off of it quickly, and told Chad that he had to talk to him. Chad testified that he told White to leave his property because he did not want to talk to him, and Chad testified that White said, "You're going to talk to me." And according to Chad, White attempted to grab Chad's collar with one hand and try to punch him with the other hand. So Booker said he started to defend himself. He claimed he grabbed White's wrist, and while pulling White towards him, he punched White in the face 3 times. Chad claims White was still standing when he left, and Chad explained that he walked down the road, called his cousin, and told his cousin to come get him because he had been in a bad situation. And right after Wendell picked up Chad, his mother called him, and Chad returned to his shop, where he's taken into custody by officers with the Tippecanoe County Sheriff's Department. So a certified nurse who formerly worked in the emergency room and intensive care unit of the local hospital happened to drive by the scene a short time later, and she knew White, but she did not recognize him. She stopped solely because she saw someone slumped over in an ATV. According to Chad, I guess he hit him and then he walked off and then just like collapsed next to his ATV. So he was unconscious, slumped over the ATV, and the left side of his face was extremely swollen, and he was bleeding from both ears and his nose, and blood was on the center console shift handle of his ATV. So his glasses were also in the middle of the road, and his baseball cap was on the passenger side floorboard of the ATV. And Morgan, the nurse, she decided to try to get his pulse and see what she could do to help. But at the time, she did not detect a pulse on his neck or his wrist. So she called 911, and she and Jeff Butler, who also stopped by when he was driving by, they got White out of the ATV, tried to perform CPR, and eventually were able to get him to the hospital. Chad admitted in court, "Yes, I hit him in the head several times, and that resulted in his death." But he claims it's just all in self-defense, and he was just defending himself while White was attempting to punch him. But the defense, or the jurors, I'm sorry, I can't talk. They were reading over the jury instructions, and they were instructed that they felt like Chad was acting in self-defense, and they pointed out, like, look, he was lawfully on his own property, so if you think that he was not the aggressor and he was acting in self-defense, then you must find him not guilty. But they looked at all the evidence, and they weren't buying that Chad was defending himself. They sat there and they looked at the evidence and how the hat was sitting on the ATV, and they believed that White pulled up on the ATV and he was sitting on the ATV when Chad came up and approached him and started hitting him on the ATV. They believe it's hard for him to get out of the vehicle he was in because with the damage to his head and face, I don't believe that he could have gotten back in that vehicle. He could have, but they just had a hard time believing that he actually got out of the ATV, got hit, then stumbled back over to the ATV and sat back down on it. They just think he was there the whole time. So they ended up finding Chad guilty after he took this case to trial. And like I said, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, 5 years parole. He did speak on this in an interview, and he's like, well, I heard from 2 of the jurors, and they wrote me letters and claimed that they only voted to find me guilty because they're hungry and they're ready to eat. I don't know how true that is. I kind of have a hard time believing that. I just don't see a juror actually putting themselves in that position to put something like that on paper, and then to have 2 jurors say the same thing. I don't know. I'd have to see the receipts before I 100% believe that. Someone commented on her TikTok and said, y'all know he unalived his 60-year-old neighbor, right? And she said the neighbor that came to Chad's home and attacked him less than a year after he had gone and fought for your freedom to talk shit on his TikTok. Yeah, sure effing did. I don't like how she responded to this because it just like takes away from the victim and the fact that somebody lost their life in all this, and it doesn't really show much empathy to the victim and their family. And just because he fought for his freedom, that does not automatically give him a pass to take somebody's life. And it showed in the juror instructions that they believe that Chad was defending himself and his property, then to find him not guilty. They found him guilty, and they believe that Chad was the aggressor in the situation because from the way they found the man's body, the blood splatter and everything else, the evidence pointed to that man never left his ATV. He pulled up, yes, he pulled up on Chad's property, but he pulled up on Chad's property allegedly wanting to talk to Chad after Chad had been terrorizing him nonstop, revving his truck in front of his house. Yeah, it seemed like the guy was going a little overboard when he just started yelling at Chad from the jump about speeding in front of his place. But Chad shouldn't have been speeding in front of his place. He's putting that man, his neighbors, and anybody else that lives in that area at risk. Because what if he was to lose control or go around the corner and not see someone on the side of the road? Anything could have happened. And Chad could have just, took it to the chin and been like, you know what, I was wrong, or take notes and be like, you know what, this guy doesn't like us speeding in front of his house. Let's not do this again. But instead, he sat there and kept showing up to the guy's house multiple times. They said he went to his house like 4 or 5 times that night, revving his engine and screaming. I can't say 100% for sure, but I feel like if Chad wasn't showing up at that man's house and instigating the whole situation, I feel like he probably wouldn't have felt like it was necessary to drive over to Chad's house on his ATV to talk to him, to try to get things solved so they could finally end things and so he could apologize to Chad. But it sounds like he just pulled up to Chad's house and Chad was just so mad. He just was seeing red and punched him a few times. Like, I don't think he was trying to take the man's life, but he definitely looked like the aggressor in this situation, and that's what the court found. But besides that, it seems like he's doing pretty well in life. He has a few different properties. He has a property that he owns with, when I looked up his background, it shows that he has a spouse by the name of Danielle Booker. So he has been married, and I don't know if he's been divorced and it just hasn't updated, or if he's still actively married, but it's showing this girl as his spouse when you run his background. And it shows that he owns this property that is 1,890 square feet with his wife or ex-wife, and then he owns another piece of property that's over 3,000 square feet, and I think this is the house that Lindsey was talking about. She's gonna eventually move in with Miley Grace into, because she's like, yeah, I'd rather move into his spot because he has a ranch and all this land. And I looked into his like finances. He's never had like any lawsuits or any bankruptcies or anything like that, and he doesn't have any other criminal history besides this manslaughter case. But that's pretty much it, guys. That's all I could find for now. Let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.